G'day guys, back with the Outer Circle, and in this episode of getting started in the Horus Heresy, more Rites of War. This time out we're going to focus on Legion Rites of War that pertain to rapid assault and outflank, namely through deep strike. So, there's 5 to get through today. I had a day off from work, so I'm pumping out an episode on this. The first Rite of War we're going to look at is the Orbital Assault, and this one used to be rather popular, but not very popular anymore, and the idea basically is that you just fill up an army full of drop pods, and it used to be popular in the early days of the Heresy, because people used to use their Heresy armies for 30k and 40k, and so had a lot of drop pods and things like that. But as the Heresy roster has filled out over time and more tanks, more transports have become available, you see this Rite of War a lot less. The first benefit of the Orbital Assault Rite of War is that all units in the army eligible to take a Rhino as a dedicated transport may instead select a Legion drop pod as their dedicated transport. Legion Dreadnoughts may take Legion drop pods as dedicated transports on a 1-to-1 ratio, and Contemptor Dreadnoughts may take a Dreadclaw drop pod as a dedicated transport on a 1-to-1 ratio. Important thing to remember with this, however, is that if you have a Talon of Dreadnoughts, you will only be able to take one Dreadnought, because they can't all fit in the same pod and must be deployed within 6 inches of one another when they start the game. Units and models in Terminator armor gain the Deep Strike special rule, which is handy, but there are legions like the Night Lords, for example, where everyone can take teleport homers on their Terminators for a small fee. The Imperial Fists have some characters like Pollux that just give it to a unit, so maybe not just for that. There's another similar Rite of War for the Legion Thousand Suns that allows them to deep strike with segment Terminators, but I don't want to go into the Legion Rites of War too much in this episode. Limitations: units that can't be deployed via deep strike, either by having access to the rule themselves or because they cannot be carried in a transport vehicle that has it, infantry drop pods for example, may not be chosen as part of the army. And you may not take a fortification allied detachment. So if you have a Thunderhawk transporter, you'll probably be able to get some extra vehicles into the battle, but otherwise you're going to have no tanks. The best thing you can add to an army with this is essentially land speeders and Jetbikes, because they have the deep strike special rule. It's handy. It doesn't say that you have to deploy by deep strike, it says that only units that cannot be deployed by deep strike can't be taken in the army. So, theoretically, you could start them on the table, you could use outflank, that kind of thing, if they have the rule. So long as they have deep strike, they can get in. Now, as I said, not the most popular Rite of War anymore. Used to be pretty popular, but now people want to take tanks, heavy armor, things like that. Dreadnought Talons, again, you got to split them up. That means you only have 4 elite slots. That means only 4 Contemptor Dreadnoughts in the army. You see the difficulty here. You can take things like rapiers, a rapier in a drop pod, for example, but that's one rapier and it's going to be snap shooting on a rival. Not great. The loss of a fortification or an allied detachment, not huge here. Overall, bit of an underwhelming Rite of War these days. I could see some potential for it moving forward, perhaps, if it included some other types of things in it, like they haven't taken the Charybdis into account. You know, units that have access to a Spartan, for example, should be upgraded to be allowed to take a Charybdis. I don't know, something like that. Alright, moving along. The Rite of War, the Angel's Wrath. Any model with a jump pack gains the hit and run special rule if it did not already possess it. Any unit eligible to take a Rhino as a dedicated transport may instead take a Storm Eagle gunship as a dedicated transport. Word of warning, this will add up incredibly quickly. Incredibly quickly on points, at 300 points a Storm Eagle. Limitations: only units with the jump infantry, skimmer and jetbike types, as well as infantry units which begin the game inside transporting skimmers and flyers, may be chosen as part of the force. This in essence means that you may not take more infantry models in your army during selection than you have skimmer, flyer, transport capacity to carry. Well, when it comes to things like your characters, they don't have access to dedicated transports, so your characters are generally going to be hopping on a jet bike or taking a jump pack. It's kind of a big deal, because there are certain characters that can't do either of those things, so by proxy it's actually limiting the types of units you can take in this Rite of War. Unless, of course, your units are small enough that you can fit a console type, perhaps, like a Forge Lord, for example, or a Master of Signals that may not be able to use these things, like jump packs. If you can fit them into a unit inside their flyer and attach them in there prior to the game starting, perhaps. But the way I read it is, since they don't have the option in part of their own armory, you can't take them. No unit with the tank type, unless it's also a skimmer or flyer, may be taken as part of this army. That's a big deal, because there are some really great tanks out there, as with the last Rite of War, so losing them is a big hit. And you may not take a fortification or allied detachment, but again, rather meaningless, because those are not things that come into play very often. And the sort of army that would really benefit from having a fortification is not the army that is deep striking its entire force into the battlefield or using jump infantry and skimmers. It's something like Iron Warriors or Imperial Fists performing basically trench warfare. So overall, as a Rite of War, it makes jump troops ever so slightly better, allows you to take more Storm Eagles than you otherwise normally could. But if you've already got 3 Storm Eagles, which is the normal sort of allotment in Heresy, in your army, that's already 900 points in Storm Eagles, give or take. You're really not gaining much from this Rite of War, because that's a huge investment. That's 1/3 of a 3,000 point army. And you're losing the ability to take tanks, heavy armor, that kind of thing. You're relying on skimmers, bikes, that kind of thing to do the heavy lifting for you. Bikes, they're gaining nothing from this Rite of War, only jump packs are. So I would really say avoid this Rite of War. Alright, the Drop Assault Vanguard. So, the effects of this one. Death from above. At least half of the Legion assault squads in the army must always enter play using the Deep Strike special rules. At the beginning of the controlling player's first turn, this Assault Vanguard may deploy all of its Legion assault squads at once. Dark of the Skies. In the player turn after that in which the Assault Vanguard deploys, enemy models within 12 inches may only fire snapshots against them. Storm of Angels. In the assault phase of the controlling player's second game turn, all of the assault squads of the Assault Vanguard gain the hit and run special rule. Now the limitations. Compulsory troops choices made for a detachment using the Rite of War must be Legion assault squads. Only units that can deploy via Deep Strike or embarked upon a transport vehicle with the Flyer type may be taken in the army. That's huge. That means drop pods don't count. Dreadclaws will, but not drop pods. Which means no Dreadnought drop pods. The army may not include any immobile units, so tarantulas, fortifications, that kind of thing, and of course the army may not include fortifications or allies anyway. So, essentially you gain a slight buff to your deep striking units, the Assault Vanguard, which is only going to be Legion assault squads. So we're not talking Palatine Blades with jump packs, Angels Tears, Destroyers, any of that kind of thing, the cool fun stuff, Dark Furies. Nope. Just your regular stock assault squads. And enemies that are really close to these guys when they deep strike in, which remember, these are scattering deep strikes, you don't want to put them too close to the enemy, you want to stay at least 8 inches away, because the 7 inches is the standard sort of scatter. You're not going to be really getting the benefit of the rule. And, if I was an enemy player and this happened to me, I would just cross the streams. I would just fire a unit further away, so I was firing full ballistic skill, and then I would turn guns and fire from a different direction at the unit closest, if that makes sense. Cross the streams, cross the shots across the battlefield rather than trying to shoot the closest unit. Just makes sense to me. Yep, in the assault phase, controlling player's second game turn, all the assault squads, the Assault Vanguard, gain the hit and run. So, 1 turn of hit and run. If I took Brotherhood of Chogris with White Scars, my whole army on bikes gains hit and run. All game. No way I can lose that ability. So, just outright superior to this. This is not a good Rite of War, because just like the last one, it's taking away all of your really heavy hitting units like your tanks, your dreadnoughts, that kind of thing. It's replacing it with assault marines, which are just marginally better than other assault marines, and it's not improving any of the other jump units or weakening any of the counter units in the other army. Don't use this Rite of War. Now, all the Rites of War I've already gone through this episode, they're not popular Rites of War. Alright, this next one though, I have seen a few of this floating around, but it's outshone by the two Legion-specific ones, the Raven Wing and the Brotherhood of Chogris. The Skyhunter Phalanx, well, this is basically pseudo-White Scars, so Legion Jetbikes Skyhunter squadrons may be taken as troops choices in a primary detachment using this Rite of War. Rapid Encirclement Jetbikes, including those taken as mounts by independent characters, may leave the table in their own movement phase and be placed into ongoing reserves, and these units re-enter play automatically using the Outflank special rule. Limitations. The only vehicles allowed in this army are those that have the Skimmer or Flyer type. All infantry units in the army must begin the game deployed in a flyer that has sufficient transport space to carry them. Other than infantry transported in a flying transport vehicle, the only unit types that may be taken are jetbikes. The army may not include a fortification detachment or an allied detachment. So, this one is semi-popular. Okay, you lose tanks, but you've got jetbikes as scoring troops. That is a huge deal. Jetbikes work best in small units. 3, 4, maybe even 5 at most. But the problem is when people cluster them up and they get like 9 or 10 of the fuckers. Because then they get hit by a couple of Vindicator shells or whatever, or engaged in one close combat, and they're all tied up, and they take up a huge section of the table. Lots of small squads of bikes works best. Trust me, White Scars player, I know how to use my bikes. Now, the fact that you can just fly off the table and go, you know what, I'm on the far right-hand side of the table, maybe I want to come back in on the far left-hand side. That's handy. But keep in mind, jetbikes can also move 30 inches in Horus Heresy. When they flat out, they get their normal 12-inch move, they get the 12-inch flat out move, and they get an additional 6 for being a jetbike. So you can move 30 inches anyway, which is halfway across the table. I think more often than not, most people will tell you I've gone over 240 inches in a game before. 7 straight turns, basically, of turbo boosting bikes around the table. You can get anywhere you want very quickly with jetbikes. You don't need to leave the table. So, if you want to have a sort of pseudo White Scars feel, this army will let you do it. But the Legion Rites, the Raven Wing Protocol, and the Brotherhood of Chogris are both far superior to this Rite of War. That said, the only real negative to it is you are losing a lot of the best vehicles. You're losing all those tanks, you're losing transports. It's kind of a big deal. But it's not as terrible as the other Rites of War. Now, the last one. This is one I've never actually seen played, which is interesting. I thought I'd bring it up for that reason. The Rite of War represents a traitor legion supported by a larger number of Imperialis militia support troops, which are to be used as cannon fodder to draw the enemy into a trap. As such, it makes an ideal matchup against the loyalist Shattered Legion force. That's just a little bit of a note from the authors of it. So, the benefits of the Sacrificial Offering. All models in the primary detachment gain the Outflank special rule and must begin the game held in reserve. The Army's Allied detachment gains the Stubborn special rule while in its own deployment zone. The units of the Allied detachment never yield victory points for being destroyed. The limitations. The army must include an allied detachment drawn from the Imperialis Militia and Warp Cult army list. This must begin the game deployed. The army must include a fortification detachment. All primary detachment units must begin in reserve. The primary detachment may not include any units with the Immobile or the Slow and Purposeful special rules, which means no placing tarantulas in your fortification that you took, because of course. The army may not include any models that deploy using the Deep Strike special rule, and this Rite of War may only be used in a traitor army. So, One of the armies that will actually benefit most from this is actually the Space Wolves. Even though they're not traders, you can call them traders for purposes of your gameplay. And they have acute sensors on everyone, which, it syncs up nicely with Outflank. A lot of units already gain Outflank, such as bikes, Jetbikes, that sort of thing. So it's any scouting units, it's not bad. You could have a lot of fun with this. You could have outflanking your Vythans, for example, which is always hilarious. Outflanking Dreadnoughts in general. I think Contemptor Dreadnoughts, which are outflanking, would be fantastic in this type of Force Org. Taking Imperialis Militia and Warp Cults, not a problem. Not a problem whatsoever. I would take them as like heavy weapons teams, that kind of thing, since they're going to be deployed inside your fortification. Since you're using traders anyway, you may as well make them something like the essentially plague zombies, give them stubborn, immune to fear, and feel no pain. That kind of thing. Yeah, those guys are great. They can just hold objectives in the back line while the rest of your army comes in from outflank. It's actually a surprisingly good Rite of War when I look at it. It's not overpowered by any stretch of the imagination. It's not terrible like the previous ones in this episode. Now, it is a traders only one, which means all those loyalist characters, you're not taking any of them. No Pollux, no Sigismund, anything like that. But of course, you couldn't take Pollux anyway because you may not include any models that deploy using the Deep Strike special rule. It's not whether you choose to deploy them or not, it's just deploy using the Deep Strike special rule. Kind of a big deal. That means no Dreadclaws, no drop pods, that kind of thing. The idea is that all your forces are basically circling and outflanking the enemy. They're not coming in from above. Fortifications, there's not a lot of great fortifications out there. Something like a Void Shield Array, for instance, with a heavy weapons team, or some tanks, something like that under it. Yeah, that's pretty solid. But most of your primary detachment, well, in fact, all of your primary detachment is going to outflank. Therefore, I would suggest an army that really can utilize that. So something with a lot of speed. World Eaters, Assault Marines, for example, this Rite of War. That could be fantastic. The more I think about it, the better this looks. So, out of all 5 of these high-speed, deep strike, and outflank bonusing Rites of War, I just made that word up, bonusing, because it provides a number of bonuses to basically the troops that they represent. This is the only one I would actually call good. All the rest I would call middling to crap, because this is the only one that doesn't take away your balls. You still can take tanks, you can still take dreadnoughts. You're getting that increased maneuverability, and it's affecting the entire primary detachment, not one unit of it, like say Assault Marines. Therefore, this is versatile. Doesn't mean it's going to win you all its games, it just means it's not utter shit. And that's what really counts when it comes to Rites of War. So, that's it. That's this episode done and dusted. Just a little bonus episode I threw together on my day off. Hope you all enjoy it. Leave your thoughts and feedback below. And I think next time out, we might just start looking at the actual Legion Rites of War. So, I'll go through a couple of Legions in the same episode. Maybe smash out like 2 or 3 Legions at once. See how we go. Back at the Outer Circle. See you all next time.